Number 1. It was summer of 2007, and I was 16 at the time. I had a pretty bad habit of crawling out of my bedroom window and going for long walks in the middle of the night. I was pretty fearless in nature, but that summer, even I was getting nervous. There was a story going around of a guy in my neighborhood, which is not the best part of town, that was attacking young women. The tale went that he would find them on a bus or a bus stop, follow them until they were alone, and then sexually assault them. I thought this was just a rumor that persisted all summer, and seemed to grow more elaborate and wild rather than fading with time. On the second day of school, rumors became facts when the police liaison for our high school held an assembly for all the female students. She told us that there was a man who was targeting young women, particularly petite girls, and that whilst no one had been raped, a few had been assaulted but managed to get away. She told us to be safe and to never walk alone, especially not at night. I didn't listen. Like an irresponsible teenager, I continued with my late night adventures. I felt like I was invincible. At the time, my then best friend was dating a guy who really creeped me out. At the time, I was casually dating a less than stellar guy myself, so I felt like I couldn't really judge. But this guy was something else. Every time I had ever encountered or spoken with him, my internal radar went off. He seemed like an average laid-back kind of guy, maybe a little unmotivated, but an okay person. At the time, I couldn't figure out what it was that raised red flags with me, but I suspected it was his body language, that subtle communication that he gave away so much. My friend and I had been growing steadily apart through high school, and when she invited me for a sleepover just after Halloween, I thought it would be fun. We could watch a Disney movie and eat Timbits. It'd be great, I thought, and it would help us reconnect a little. When I arrived, I was suddenly doubtful. When I accepted the invitation, I did not know that her boyfriend had moved in temporarily into her house. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs, and the boyfriend was staying in the room besides my best friend's. I thought it was a really weird situation, and I didn't really want to hang around with him, but I loved my friend, so I stayed. I was so lost in my own thoughts, I hardly remember the movie. The movie ended around midnight, and my friend fell asleep before it was over. I turned off the television and flopped onto the mattress, but I couldn't sleep. A very strange thought was forming in my head. The guy stalking and assaulting women, his physical description matched her boyfriend's, as the stalker guy tended to go after young, small girls. Both my friends and I were short and slim. I knew that her boyfriend had been to my neighborhood around the time of the attacks as well, as I had seen him at a bus stop once on one of my midnight walks out. I told myself that I was just being paranoid, and yet I couldn't drop the idea. After about an hour of lying in the dark, I was just beginning to drift off to sleep when I heard the door slowly begin to open. The room was set up with 2 mattresses on the floor. My friend had the one closest to the window, and mine was so near the door that if I reached out my legs I could close it. The door only opened a crack before I reacted. On instinct, I stretched out my leg and pushed it against the door, quickly shutting it. My heart was beating so fast, and my brain whirred through the scenario. Was it a burglar? No. I hadn't heard anyone coming up the stairs. It had to be the boyfriend. I waited quietly for a moment to see if the boyfriend would say anything or knock. Maybe he wanted the television back. He didn't say anything, but he did try to open the door again. And again. I scooched further down the mattress and put both my feet against the door. It was as if he couldn't quite decide what he wanted to do. He would try the door once or twice, walk quietly back to his room, wait a minute, and then come back and try the door again. The door had no lock, so if I didn't keep my legs against the door, he could easily open it. I wasn't sure what to do, so I kept on doing what I was doing, and finally, after about 30 minutes of silently trying the door, he went back to his room. I didn't hear anything else, so I figured that he fell asleep. For obvious reasons, I didn't sleep that night. I just kept my feet against the door and tried to figure out what I would say to my friend. I had somewhere to be early in the morning, and my ride came at 6 a.m. So when I snuck out, my friend was still fast asleep. I left her a note to call me ASAP, and later in the day, I called the police non-emergency line and spoke to an officer. I told her that I didn't have a lot to go on, that it was mostly intuition, but that I had a tip about the guy assaulting women in the neighborhood. The officer thanked me for the tip and reminded me to stay safe, and for once, I listened. I didn't go on any nighttime walks for the next little while. Soon after, and before I got a chance to talk to my friend again, I think she may have been avoiding me because I knew she was around and she never did call me. My friend's boyfriend was arrested. He had been the one after all, the guy sexually assaulting women. I guess the police were already suspicious of him, so when his DNA matched the last assaulted guy on the scene, he was caught. It was a terrible thing to go through, but my friend was really brave, and she even worked with the police to get justice for the victims. The boyfriend pleaded guilty to 6 counts of sexual assault and 3 counts of sexual assault causing bodily harm in May 2009. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and is to be listed on the Registry of Sex Offenders for 20 years. If you're interested in reading more, you can read the articles in the description. Moral of the story, kids, is always listen to your intuition. Number 2. I was 10 years old and just started 5th grade. I had made a new friend in school, Janie. My parents allowed me to go for a sleepover at her house, even though they'd only met her mother once, and my mum and dad were pretty laid back because I was their last child, and my sisters were 9 and 13 years older than me. So my mum dropped me off, said hello to Janie's mum, and left. Me and Janie started playing karaoke when her mum decided that she was going to leave. She said goodbye to us, gave us kisses on the cheek, and I remember that she smelled a bit like black licorice. Me and Janie were left to do whatever we wanted for the next 5 hours. Janie's older sister came home around 1 a.m. and told us that we should be going to bed because we were falling asleep on the couch, and so we went into Janie's room and laid in her bed. Later that night, I can't be sure what time it was because it was pitch black, but Janie's mum came home. I woke up to a pounding sound on Janie's bedroom door. I started yelling in fear when I felt a hand cover my mouth. It was Janie telling me to be quiet and pretend to be asleep. But at that moment, it was too late. Her mother had kicked in the door. She stormed over to the bed and grabbed Janie's face. She began screaming at Janie because we accidentally left the TV on. I was trying to hide under the covers, but she saw me, and she began slamming her fists on the bed around me and screamed, "You think you're better than me?" over and over. I was sobbing, and all I could think about was going home. I was so scared, and I begged her mum to let me call my parents because I felt sick. Her mum, though, grabbed my chin, looked me in the eyes and said, "I know what you're doing, little girl, and you aren't going anywhere until I say you can." She stormed out of the room, slamming the half-broken bedroom door behind her. Janie said nothing, and neither did I. Needless to say, I did not sleep that night, and in the morning when I went to call my mother, Janie's mother was on the phone. She wouldn't let me use it even though I asked multiple times, and finally when she was going to take a shower, I heard her pass the phone over to Janie's sister and said, "Don't let that little bitch use this phone. If you do, I ain't buying you cigarettes anymore." I was the sheltered kid, and at the time I overheard that, I knew that I had to get out of there. I approached Janie's sister, and she basically threw the phone at me. She was ready to give it to me before I even asked for it, and with a look of fear in her eyes, she said, "My mum is calling her guy, so you need to call home now." And so I did. She saved my life, and I still believe it to this day. Was her guy someone who was going to come and get rid of me? I shudder at the thought. The rest of the story isn't very exciting. My mother picked me up and I acted like nothing was wrong. 2 days later though, it was Parents' Day. Janie was in my class, which meant her mother was there as well. Her mother approached me and asked me why I never wanted to come over anymore, and she accused me of being a mean girl. She was talking to me in a way that seemed harmless, therefore wasn't obvious to my mum or teacher. I kept my mouth shut and didn't say a word. But 2 weeks later, my older sister was babysitting me whilst our parents were at the movies, and I broke down and told her what happened because I couldn't stop thinking about it. She comforted me and told my parents. We hugged each other and cried. A couple of weeks later, Janie stopped coming to school. My classmates wondered what happened, and so did I. I didn't want to ask my parents what happened. 15 years later, I heard from Janie on Facebook. There was no life-changing conversation, but we did exchange pleasantries. I suppose that's life sometimes. So crazy, alcoholic, abusive mother, let's never meet again. Number 3. I was in Tesco, a generic wholesale shop that we have here in England, and just innocently browsing the DVD section on my own. I was looking at the new releases, but not paying too much attention. My friend's parents were always away on holiday, and she was having a sleepover. Girls' night at hers, and had asked me to get a scary horror film for us to watch. Whilst looking, I heard, "So you like movies, eh?" I turned around and saw this guy who looked to be around 70 years old. He had greasy hair, but what struck me the most is that he was wearing socks and sandals. Yeah, that kind of made me smirk. I looked at him and just said, "Yep," and proceeded to carry on down the aisle. He followed me and started talking about films that he'd seen, what I should get, etc. I just replied, "Yeah, okay, whatever," and was reaching the end of the aisle. I'm a girl, 23, but must have looked younger, as I didn't have that much makeup on, and I have dark brown long hair. This old guy was still following me and asking me where I'm going, do I have a boyfriend, do I like oral, and if I am alone. That was it for me. I turned around, looked him dead in the eyes, and said, "Piss off, you hillbilly pervert," and walked off into the shop. I had gotten some ice cream and some popcorn and was now in my car driving to my friend's, singing along, badly, to the radio. I'm not so sure how long it had been there, but I noticed a silver pickup taking the same turns as I was. I was only doing around 50 in a 70 area, and they could have easily have overtaken me if they'd wanted to, but it stayed right behind me. My friend's turning past me, but I could take the next turning and double back on myself through the back roads. I didn't indicate, something I regret now and realised that this was very stupid of myself. I took the turning and drove as fast as I could to her house. And as I did, I saw the car take the same turning as me. She lives in a cul-de-sac area, and I parked my car down the road, not in front of hers, and ran into her garden. She always keeps the gate open, and I didn't know how long it would be before she'd have to open the main door, so I chose the garden. I locked the gate behind me and knocked on the back door. After being let in and being called a weirdo and peeping Tom, I got handed some wine. Not a minute later, there was a knock on the door. My friend opened it. It was the creepy guy from Tesco, with his silver car in the middle of the road. He was standing there saying something along the lines of, his daughter's car had broken down, and she had rung up from a house along this street, and he's here to pick her up. Is she here? He described me and what I was wearing. My friend said no, and shut the door in his face and locked it. I hadn't told them about the creepy guy, I'd only just got there. But she said there was something off about him, and wasn't my dad. No way I would have ever have known him. We saw through the curtain that he went to every other house in the cul-de-sac. He would get turned away, and then move on to the next one. We later found a piece of paper in a plastic sandwich bag left on my car windshield. It said, "Where did you go? I wasn't finished with you." Number 4. I was around 11 or 12, and living in upstate New York. I had made friends with a girl in my class, Stacy, who was very poor and lived in what was considered the ghetto of my town. If you've ever lived in upstate, you'll know how laughable this is. We'd often hang out at my house. There was plenty of healthy snacks and I had cable. But one day, I was invited to a sleepover at her place. I packed a bag and headed over after school. Stacy's mum, who didn't have it going on, had friends over, and they were drinking shitty wine and generally acting like douchebags before they went on and headed out to the bar to get more trashed. She went out to have a cigarette, except for one guy. I can't remember his name, but he was about 30, tall, lean, and very creepy. He sat down with us and made small talk. I noticed Stacy looked very uncomfortable, which made me uncomfortable also. "You're very pretty," he said, inching closer to me. I thanked him and tried to move away. He caught my arm. "I bet all the boys in your class love you. You're sexy as hell." I was pudgy and never wore makeup like the other girls in my class. so I wasn't particularly popular. And being a dumb kid, I told him so. He smiled at me. "I'll be your boyfriend. Do you want some wine? How about a cigarette? I bet you look so hot when you smoke." At that point, Stacy got up and left. I tried to follow her, but the guy still had a firm grip on my arm. With his other hand, he caressed the inside of my thigh and moved upwards. I froze, not knowing what to do. I had never experienced sex before, and being a very sheltered girl, and all I knew was that this was wrong and terrifying. He slipped his hand inside my trousers, and I managed to tear my arm away and ran upstairs. And I locked myself in the bathroom until I heard them leave. I then got my phone out and called my dad. I didn't want to tell him what happened, but I cried for almost 2 days until he finally coaxed it out of me. The police in my town are notoriously lazy. They took my statement, and this man was not unknown to them, and no arrest was made. At lunch the next day, 2 girls I'd never spoken to, Ashley and Jemima, sat at my table. They told me that he did the same thing to Jemima when she had a sleepover with Stacy. Ashley had agreed to be his girlfriend, and he'd forcibly taken her virginity, which her parents reported to the police, hence him being not unknown. To my knowledge, he got away with everything. The police never did a damn thing.